If you just have a bit of a talk about that previous slide, that one there, I want to move it on. I'm not going to go over some of the points because we've got some quite good discussion points there. What I want to talk to you about is the laws, because to me, I believe the laws are probably more important at marginalising Murray than the wars were. So I've kind of dealt with the wars, because really there's two types of laws, and those of you who do teach kids this know this, but there's statute law, and then there's case law. And that's not a difficult concept to understand, because case law is the decision of a judge, and that of course creates precedents. And those precedents signal how a particular law is going to be interpreted subsequently. So those are the two things that we're going to be dealing with in this case over here. And I've sort of tried over here. Often precedents stay in place until some judge comes along in later court cases and changes it. Best example of that is in America, where they changed the separate but equal of 1896, which you do in black civil rights, you know. In 1954, the Brown decision changes a previous precedent, so they can be changed. And of course, statute law is law as passed by Parliament. Now, I might just say here, this is important to understand this as I preface into Parihaka, that any law in New Zealand in the 19th century had to go through a lower house, then it went to the Legislative Council, which was an upper house, which we don't have anymore, all right? And then it was signed off by the governor. So there are three discrete steps that a bill has to go through in order to become enacted as a statute. It's important to remember that, because these days New Zealand has what they call a unicameral legislature, one house, then signed by the governor, and that's it, it's a law. Of course, they do the debates in between time, but it's important that at this stage, when they mirrored the British Constitution, which had a House of Lords and a House of Commons. So New Zealand had a House of Representatives and a Legislative Council, so two houses. So keep that in mind when we're talking about these things. Now, one of the first things they did was set up this native land court. They knew that it was going to be very tricky, because if there are 1,000 people who are on as owners of a block of land, it was very difficult to get that land sold, because they all had to agree. So they changed the law through an act of Parliament, and interesting enough, I've made that plural, because they kept on tinkering with the Native Land Acts and keep on changing the rules. I've given you the genesis of that change, because it meant that as long as they got 10 signatures, they could actually sell the land. So 10 people who agreed to sell this block of land, irrespective of the other 20 or 30 who might think that they've actually got a claim to that land as well. Now, of course, that meant that under this Native Land Court, which the Act set up, those disputes had to be decided by a court. But what they did is they would have a court case about land in Taranaki, and they would hold it in a court in Gisborne. So the people who are disputing it would have to travel across to Gisborne, stay in a hotel or whatever, while waiting around for the court case to be held. And in the process, they got themselves into debt from the travel and the accommodation and so on. And often the only way they could get out of it was to actually discharge a debt against the land that they were going to get if they got it. And if they didn't, then they were even worse off. So there's lots, and they're saying more land was lost through the Native Land Court and the Native Land Acts than was lost through the wars and the confiscations. So this case here is one that I'm now using as a very seminal case. It's called the Parihaka case, but basically the story goes that Parihaka's tribe donated some land in 1850 for the Church of England to create a school, but no school was ever created. And so Parihaka, who was an MP at the time, took the Church of England, the Bishop of Wellington as it was, to court, and the Chief Justice made a decision. And in that decision, they said that because it is to do with land sales and so on, it's to do with a treaty, and that's only between nations. And he argued that the natives didn't actually have a nation as such, and he said that as a result of this, he quotes three precedents in this particular decision, and he says the treaty is a simple nullity. Now that put shockwaves right across the whole of the community. It's an incredibly important decision, because subsequent precedents use the Parihaka decision. It's actually very, very complex. I've written this about 10 times to try and keep it as simple as I possibly can. But the decision is that basically he thinks the treaty is a simple nullity because Maori, one of the reasons is that because Maori did not have the right to be a sovereign nation in order to even sign the treaty. That was the first argument. And the second argument was because anything to do with native title was the prerogative of the Crown, not the prerogative of a court such as his. So he said reject his court's ability to even deal with it, and therefore he said, as far as I'm concerned, any decision I make just negates the treaty as a legally binding, despite immediately I said, despite all this stuff to do with land. It's incredible. So they are saying, and that is to me the ultimate assertion of sovereignty. You know, it's like that Wizard of Id cartoon, isn't it? He said, you've got to remember the golden rule. And what's the golden rule? He who has the gold makes the rules. It's a classic example, isn't it? You know? And that's really what happens here with this one. Now, that is an example of precedent of case law. But look at this next one here, and I'll whiz through this one. Parihaka is a beautiful example of using statute law, not case law, statute law, to assert your particular position on something. Now, I want to introduce the notion of creeping confiscation because that's a really important point, and lots of people that teach about Parihaka don't make any issue about creeping confiscation, but it's absolutely pivotal. Because what happens in that diagram over here, they passed that New Zealand Settlement Act which confiscates these big wedges of land in Taranaki and Waikato. But here's the rub, they don't actually confiscate the land until 20 or 30 years later. Why? They don't have enough bloody surveyors. The surveyors that physically survey the land, and I call it the theodolite weapon of mass destruction. The surveyors coming in, measuring up the land so they can actually legitimise a theoretical confiscation that took place in 1863. And Ballach calls that creeping confiscation because they're doing it bit by bit, slowly, over time, as fast as the surveyors can go to survey these big wedges of land. And that's where this Parihaka issue comes to a head. Because these people had been promised reserves, Te Whiti and Tohu in Parihaka had been promised reserves, and they never got them, and yet the surveyors started turning up and surveying the land, and so they decided, well look, we're not going to be able to resist them, because that didn't work very well last time in Taranaki and Waikato. So what we're going to do is we're going to try a different strategy, we're going to try passive resistance, and that's exactly what they do. Now I always put November the 5th as a very pivotal date because it really upsets me, and that's part of my kind of overcoming the ignore, that people in New Zealand celebrate Guy Fawkes Day, a Catholic parliament in England in 1605, as a day that New Zealanders celebrate and know nothing about November the 5th, 1881, which is when the troops invaded Parihaka. And once I overcame that, I did this at Avondale, and then when I went to Onehunga High School from there, I used to say to my kids, it's Parihaka Day today, and I completely eschew, reject fireworks. I didn't even let my kids do it. They still did it, but I didn't let them do it. I didn't approve it. Like, and I absolutely don't approve of the other one too, the American one. Totally object to that. So here we go. Here's Taranaki. Now there's the confiscation line. That's called the Aukati, the confiscation line. But of course, the surveys have got to come in. We'll start here, boom, 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 and gradually, over 20, 25 years, they're actually gradually taking that land. Because as soon as they put a peg in the ground, a surveyor's peg in the ground, they've actually asserted the colonial ownership of that land, and it can be sold. In this case, a lot of it was given to the people who fought on the side of the British during the wars, those military settlers and so on, and they were given land because they couldn't afford to pay them, but they paid them in land. All right. So in Parihaka, we have these surveyors coming in, doing the surveying, and they can see them, they're quite demonstrable. And so what Te Whiti and his cohorts did was that he starts to remove the surveyors' pegs, and he would pack up the surveys into their horses, and they would kind of move it. And then they go one step further, they would go onto this land and they would start to plough it. It's all non-violent stuff, but it's actually passive resistance. So it's fairly active for passive resistance, but nonetheless, and of course the settlers got really miffed by this and said, we've got to do something about this. So it's clearly a battle of sovereignty. It's a battle of asserting who's going to win in this little exercise here. So it was quite provocative. Now, this is actually a really important slide because look at this. Remember I said about statute law? Now this, Murray Prisoners Trials Act 1879, Confiscated Lands Inquiry and Murray Prisoners Trials Act, the Commission issued under the above mentioned Act, Proclamation by Government, Murray Prisoners Act. All of these acts are to do with Parihaka. And, as I said before, 3 times debated in the lower house, 3 times debated in the upper house, and then signed off by the governor. The fastest lawmakers in the West. Why? To deal with Parihaka. All this legislation here, but it actually gets worse. This is the one that really shocks you, really, because if you look at this one here, this is one of the clauses of the Act. This is the West Coast North Island Act. It's pretty specific. That's where Parihaka is. You think about this as you, right? Any person who assembles together, armed or unarmed, or with or without tools or implements, for any of the purpose or objects aforesaid, or are present at the commission of any such offences, or acts as aforesaid for the purpose of aiding, assisting, or countenancing the commission of any such acts or offences, being present may reasonably be suspected to be present for all any such purposes. That's incredible! That is actually thought police, isn't it? It's thought police. I think you're going to protest on Saturday, right, I'm arresting you now. I've got you. Why? Because you just look like a person that's going to object on Friday, on Saturday. Now that's amazing that that could be passed as legislation in New Zealand. So, and it gets worse too, because what happens is that they don't give them anything to do with due process. They don't bring a trial or anything. There's no trials, because they can do that under martial law. So that was one of those laws that they passed to say, well, it's martial law, we can do what we like here. And so they actually took Te Whiti and Tohu and they sent them to Dunedin, to a bay in Dunedin, Anderson's Bay in Dunedin, and they put them into a cave. All these prisoners that they'd interned after November the 5th, 1881, they sent them down there and they just put them into this cave for 2 years. Never put them to trial, nothing, because it was martial law. It's the ultimate assertion of sovereignty over them. So they were charged with this, but they never had any trial. They never had a chance to defend themselves. Why? Because that's the sense. He who has the gold makes the rules. You know, that's the same thing. So that's something that I believe. I mean, I'm sort of reading extensively. I thought that previously when I'm writing this book at the moment on this whole time period, and this is the start of it. This is the start, I believe, of the ignore. It's the Prendergast decision, the Weeparata decision, and Parihaka in particular. Parihaka is a bit more evocative, I think, you know, because it's got a lot more things happening in it than the other one, which is all sort of legalese. So, what I want you to do is just very quickly see if you can answer some of these. I'll just do a couple more after this. So, you're doing well. We started a little bit late. Why is New Zealand Settlement Act poorly named? See if you can write down a reason for that. It's just retelling what I've just told you. Why was land confiscated after the wars? Because they were rebels. Quotation marks. These are used to explain surveys coming in after November 5th.